War is a bad thing. Agreed? Agreed. Nowadays, that's a commonly agreed upon thing, but it wasn't always like that. Hundreds and even thousands of years ago, war was looked upon as something honorable, something that was just normal and happened all the time. All of that changed in World War I. The 20th century is often described with three words: blood, rhythm, and fear. For now, I will focus on fear and blood specifically. First thing that probably comes to your mind when you hear those two is, well, there was a lot of wars, so that's why it's those two, right? Wrong! Wars happened all the time, even more often in previous centuries. But with the rapid evolution of human inventions, we got stuff like war poisons, bombers and the like. What changed war from a battle between soldiers to a battle between the amounts of destruction caused to anyone, women, children, elderly, everyone, with the civilian death toll in World War I being anywhere between 6 and 13 million. There were civilian deaths before as well, of course, but never to this extent. Now, why am I even talking about this? Wasn't this video supposed to be about manga? Well, I love studying history, especially studying the wars that happened before the 19th century. And this manga follows the events of one of my favorites, the Second Punic War, and shows what exactly war was back in those days. So join me on this journey of pain, horror, madness, genius, laughs, and pretty much everything else in a manga simply named Ad Astra, Scipio to Hannibal. The Second Punic War is a war that happened mainly between Rome and Carthage, with some other alliances like Numidia, Iberian tribes, Syracuse, etc. And one of my favorite things this manga does is keeping faithful to its source material, that source material being history. It actually follows the order of the fights. The generals and some soldiers actually existed, and even the tactics that each general used in each of the fights are very much on point. Now, you might be thinking, why should anyone read a manga that sticks so much with history, and how can that even be entertaining? Well, to explain this, let's look at a couple of aspects. The first one we'll look at is the fact that the mangaka already had a story and he just needed to fill in the blanks to make it entertaining. For example, let's take a look at the relationship between Gaius and Scipio. From history, all we know about their relationship for sure is that they were friends later on in their military careers. But we also have this legend about them being friends since childhood. But the problem there is the fact that Scipio comes from a noble family, and the history of Gaius' family is completely unknown, with assumptions being made that he was not from a rich family. So let's see what Mihachi Kagano does with this. He creates a beautiful story of two childhood friends who've been there for each other in the toughest of times, no matter what, but the two of them still have their own stories. Like Gaius' struggle to cope with the fact that he isn't the next big prodigy, or Scipio's family struggles with his father and fiancé. What makes them amazing as both individual characters and as a duo. Of course, there are many more turns with their characters, but as I said, only minor spoilers here. The second aspect we'll look at is the rivalry between Hannibal and Scipio. Hannibal is often regarded as one of the greatest military commanders ever, but Scipio is up there as well, and this manga set their rivalry up perfectly. Hannibal from the very start of the manga was set up as this prodigal genius, a gift by the god Baal for the people of Carthage, and because of that he never noticed anyone as any threat. He was a genius, so why would he? That was the case until chapter 11 and the ending of the Battle of Trebia. In this battle, Romans were getting ripped apart until Scipio stepped up and brought up the morale of the troops with his genius alone, and Hannibal immediately, although not yet concerned about him, noticed him. This scene also already sets up Scipio's strategy throughout the story, which is, well, copying Hannibal, and not only in his tactics. The difference between them is, however, the fact that Scipio has Gaius by his side, a friend he can always rely on for emotional support, whilst Hannibal is alone, since he was always seen as an untouchable being by everyone, even his brothers. So, how will this affect them? The third and the last aspect we'll look at is gonna be the mangaka's ability to give the characters we only know vague things about amazing personalities. Take for example someone like Hannibal. He's one of Hannibal's highest rank commanders, and he suffers from an inferiority complex. We see his progression to insanity throughout the manga, and it doesn't take long for everyone to notice that he's starting to act weird. But Hannibal doesn't understand what it is, since he never had to struggle with anything. That is when his conversation with Magnon commences. Magnon is a character we see for the first time, and from the very first panel we see him in, we can see he's just a normal soldier on the lookout. That makes him a perfect person for Hannibal to have this conversation with. Hannibal asks him if he might know what's going on with Hannibal, and Magnon delivers one of my favorite speeches I've ever read or heard. Well, a guy like you could never understand Hannibal's feelings. Hannibal, you're a man blessed with the ability to actualize anything you put your mind to. It's only natural that a man as gifted as you could never truly understand the feelings of us mere commoners. Even when you were young, you were always alone, and your heart was distant, as if it were in Rome rather than with us. You were a solitary figure, whose special presence seemed too far for any of us to reach. You commanded the troops before you were old enough to even grow a full beard, and it was all but impossible to not admire your skill in overcoming any enemy you faced. It wasn't just me, Mago, Gisco, Maharbal. We all admired you, but we all realized at some point that none of us could ever be Hannibal, that we weren't particularly special. To realize that you're just another nameless one among many is a painful thing. I struggled in my own way. I struggled desperately to prove that I wasn't mediocre. But no matter how much I struggled, I knew deep down that I really wasn't special, and so I gave up. Us ordinary people mature into adults only by giving up on such dreams. Such a life surely can be much fun, no? But being fun or not has nothing to do with it. That's simply what an ordinary life is. The art in the manga as well is simply sublime, and it gives off this weirdly realistic vibe, especially in the volume cover art, where honestly sometimes I can't tell whether it's 3D modeling or hand-drawn. And when coming across this manga, that was the reason I started to read it. It really stuck out to me. Okay, that and the fact that per aspera ad astra is my favorite Latin saying, so that immediately caught my attention, but not the point. Now, if you know me, you probably know that I couldn't give two shits about politics. Coming from a country that has one of the most complicated political systems on the planet, and a lot of talks surrounding parts of it which I will rather not talk about, it all just always turned me off from having any interest in politics. It's also really fucking boring in my opinion. So imagine my surprise when I actually started caring about politics for the first time ever reading this manga. Yes, fucking politics. Now, what was so different between this and real life politics? And this might surprise you, but not that much. When I think of real life politics, I think of older white males arguing, and that's also what happens in the manga. However, what's interesting here is the fact that in Ad Astra, you are met with these characters, the real intentions they have, and the fact that they are not just sitting in their chairs for the whole year, doing nothing and getting hemorrhoids, but actually want to go into battle and put their lives on the line for the Roman Empire. Well, most of them at least. And that's where we come to my favorite arc of the political side of things. The story of the plebeian, Gaius Terentius Varro. After Minicius' victory over Gisco, one of Hannibal's high-ranked officers, Fabius is forced to go back to Rome to face the Senate and its new orders, and this is where we first meet Varro. Varro is a very cunning man who is not afraid of putting others down to put himself on a pedestal, and as soon as he finds the chance to do it, he will. So after Fabius' position weakens, he realizes it's his time to strike. He knows that he cannot sway the Senate to turn onto Fabius, but he doesn't even need to. What was going to happen at the same time as all of this was an election of two new consuls. The way elections happened back then were pretty complicated, but Scipio summarizes it pretty well here. And Varro is here the only candidate for a consul from the plebs, but being the elected isn't the only thing he wants. He also wants all the power he can possibly get. So he decides to use Fabius' tactics against him. When Fabius decided to turn this war into a war of attrition, he sold off his villages to fund the war. But Varro turned this around and started to spread a rumor against other plebeians of Fabius actually aligning with Hannibal. and that's why his villages were untouched. He managed to spread this rumor because of his lack of morals and ability to easily control the masses, which he describes as merely a gathering of dimwits, united only by their shared ignorance. They will never lend their ear or support to anything that is complicated or requires a sacrifice on their part, even if it's the correct course of action. The only thing their ears will pay heed to are simple ideas that reassure them of their welfare. And to be honest, he isn't that wrong. But a man without morals who can think up only of the simplest ideas cannot get far, and that exactly happened to him. His whole plan was to become consul with more power revolved around putting down Aemilius and Fabius to put himself up. However, when it came to time to battle, it was Aemilius who fought bravely and did great at inspiring soldiers, even being willing to sacrifice himself trying to do anything, whilst Varro turned tail and ran away from one of the biggest battles of the war, where Rome lost 60,000 soldiers compared to 6,000 lost by Carthage. Now, you might say that he did the right thing because he at least survived, but would you rather live your whole life in shame of being a coward? And if you know anything about those times in history, your children and their children and so forth would probably need to burden that shame as well. Or would you rather die a hero, known as someone who would never run away from battle, leaving thousands and thousands of your soldiers behind to die? Now, this manga isn't without its drawbacks, but most of them are minuscule enough that I don't even think I should talk about them. But I will mention one or two. First, and the biggest problem for the longest time, was the fact that since the manga is very underground, a lot of the manga has not been fully translated for the longest time. Now, what else can I talk about? Well, in chapter 5 we see Hannibal on an elephant, and then a couple of panels later we see the elephant shapeshift into a horse. But I mean, it was back in those times, so hey, who knew what might have happened? And that's the type of problems in this manga, and I don't even have much more to say about them. So please, if this video made you feel even a little bit like reading, please go ahead and read the best manga you've never read, Ad Astra, Scipio to Hannibal. And thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts on the manga, the video, or anything else. Tell me your life story, why not? And that's been about it. Trigger off.